ST 2016. This is
interviews, music reviews, and more. This is The Hotter Show.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to The Hotter Show. I hope you are doing absolutely fantastic here today, as I am offering once again some more Halloween-related content. Today, we are going to be taking a listen to 10 family-friendly, scary stories. Now, you may be asking yourself, family-friendly? What do you mean by that? Well, I'm going to say this quite simply. What I have done is collected 10 classic ghost stories, urban legends, or just stories that I found that are generally told to kids around campfires, at sleepovers, things of that nature. A couple of these were actually told to me around the campfire back in the day when I was a scout, so I remember them very fondly. And since we are telling stories that are best told around a campfire, I figure this is in order. Our very own Halloween campfire to share these 10 stories. Now, I will warn you, these are family friendly, so there's no massive amounts of gore, there's no cursing, there's no suggestive things of that nature, except for maybe the last story a little tiny bit. But it's a classic urban legend, and the second you hear what it is, I think you'll understand what I mean. That being said, if you are listening to this with a very young child, maybe reconsider that. Any kids from, I'd say, 8 and up should be plenty okay. I got most of these as suggested from websites that said all these stories should be appropriate for kids ages 8 and up or 10 and up. Use your judgment, but I wanted to do something a little different and just had a little bit of an offering for the whole family, since a lot of the stories that I tell on this podcast are definitely not family friendly when it comes to this time of year. So I hope that you enjoy it, as it was a lot of fun to go back and read some of these classic campfire and sleepover ghost stories. So let's step up to the fire, take a seat, maybe grab a marshmallow or two if you so choose. I'll grab the flashlight, and let's tell some stories. The Scarecrow. I live on a small farm out in the country. Every year my dad puts up scarecrows in our fields because he thinks they're not only effective in keeping crows out, but evil spirits as well. I guess he's a little superstitious. The scarecrows he sets out are the same ones year after year. After so much wear and tear, they were showing their age. This October started out just like any other October. The weather was turning cool, and the leaves were beginning to change into brilliant orange and yellow colors. One Saturday, us kids got together and decided to make a new scarecrow. Being creative, we gathered our supplies and got to work. This scarecrow was to be different. This was my special design. I wanted a creepy scarecrow, much scarier than the others. Hours later, we finished up. Indeed, he was the ugliest, most frightening scarecrow I've ever seen. I was so proud. Mom called us in for supper, so we planted the scarecrow out in the cornfield where I could see it from my bedroom window. Not giving it any more thought, we went in and ate. Soon, the wind picked up, and it began lightning. No storm was forecasted, but it looked like we were in for a rough night. Rain began falling as I went up to bed. I was worried about my new scarecrow, so I peeked out my window. And what I saw shocked me. He was there all right, but not where we had placed him. It appeared to me that he was several feet to the right. Puzzled, I stood at the window and watched intently. The lightning was bright, and every time it flashed, I could see my scarecrow. The problem was it looked as if he was moving when the sky was dark, only to turn up in another spot when the sky lit up. Thinking that I must be imagining this, I put my pajamas on and went to bed. Later on, a loud crack of thunder woke me up. By now, the rain was pounding down, making it difficult to see out my window. I slipped on my shoes and snuck outside to check on my scarecrow, not sure where he was. I walked around in the thunderstorm, half blind by the cold, stinging rain. Clumsily, I stumbled over a fallen branch and fell down in a pass of mud, face first. When I looked up, there was my scarecrow, glaring down at me. His eyes were huge and glowing red. I couldn't pick myself fast enough. I ran screaming back to the house and never looked back. After tossing and turning the rest of the night, I woke up to bright sunshine and the smell of bacon. Not wanting to tell my parents what had happened, I sat quietly and ate breakfast. Anxious and apprehensive, I then went outside to look around. My dad was already looking for my scarecrow. I could see the other scarecrows all in their usual places, but mine was nowhere to be found. Full of confusion, I began crying. Not because of losing my scarecrow, but because of the pure, unadulterated fear. My father told me that he probably blew away and would be discovered in the field during harvest. I knew better. Somehow, someway, that scarecrow came alive. How? I don't know. Years have passed, and to this day, I have never seen my scarecrow again. What happened that stormy night? Do scarecrows really keep evil spirits out? Or maybe they can be possessed by one. I don't live on that farm anymore, but I've never ventured outside during a thunderstorm again. The Lady with the Emerald Ring. The night before Christmas in 1798, a rich man's wife became deathly ill, so he called for the doctor. By the time the doctor had arrived, his wife had died. Her husband was so grief-stricken that he locked himself in his room and did not attend the funeral the following day. The servants of the house carried the rich woman's body to the vicar who, in a drunken stupor, held the ceremony quickly. The veil was drawn across her face, the stone lid lowered, and the iron grill locked. Just before the clergyman fell to sleep later that night, he remembered the beautiful emerald ring on the finger of the woman who he had laid to rest. Wanting the ring and thinking no one would find out, he went downstairs, unlocked the lid, opened it, and tried to pry the ring off. But it would not budge. He ran and brought back a file to cut the ring off of her finger. When that did not work, he severed her finger and pulled off the ring. As he left, he turned around to pick up the iron lid and screamed at the top of his lungs. He dropped the ring and ran. The woman had awoken and was moaning. She had held her severed finger towards him with an evil smile on her face. Wearing nothing but her fine silk dress, the woman walked back to her home, knocked on the door, rang the doorbell, but to no avail. The servants had all gone to sleep, for it was late on Christmas Eve. She lifted a heavy stone and threw it at her husband's window, and there she waited. He came to the window with a sorrowful look on his face. Suddenly, to her surprise, he yelled,
"Go away! Why must you torture me so? Don't you know my wife has just died? Let me mourn and do not bother me again."
With this, he shut the window. He did not realize it was his wife who had thrown the rock at his window. She repeated her actions again, throwing a rock at the window. He opened the window again and she yelled to him, "I am no one but your so-called dead wife. Now come down here and open this door unless you'd like me to die a second time on your doorstep."
Are you a ghost then?
He said to her. She said, "No, for ghosts don't bleed. Now come down here before I catch my death with this cold." The man with a joyous look on his face came down to meet his wife and took her inside, where he called the doctor once more and told him the news. Meanwhile, the clergyman ran home and up the stairs. In a state of fright, he hung himself on the rafters of his home. If only he had known that the woman only wanted to thank him. She had not died after all, but had gone into a coma. And when he cut off her finger, the pain woke her up. The Hitchhiker. A man moved to a small town and slowly got to know a few of his new neighbors. He soon learned that most of the residents believed that one of the roads out of town was haunted. But he didn't believe in ghosts, so he never asked why. One day, the man went to visit a friend in another town. He was enjoying his visit so much that he ended up staying later than he planned. By the time he left for home, it was way past midnight. There was no moon that night, and once he left the town limits, the only lighting came from his headlights. Soon, it began raining, and the rain made it more difficult to see. As a result, it was almost too late to brake when the man saw the woman on the road. He jammed his foot hard on the brake and the car swerved in the road before coming to a stop, just inches from her legs. Normally, the man would have driven off again, but it was so late and the weather was so terrible, he decided to offer the woman a ride. She got into his car, took off her wet hoodie, and held her hands up to the vents to capture the warmth. When they reached town, the woman directed him to her home, thanked him for the ride, and went inside. When the man got home, he discovered she had left her hoodie in his car. He thought about driving back to her house, but it was so late that he decided to go inside to bed and return the hoodie the next day. The next morning, he drove back to the house where he had dropped her off, walking to the door and rang the doorbell. An older woman answered the door, and he handed her the hoodie. "I gave your daughter a ride home last night, and she left this in my car," he said. The woman began to cry. "My daughter was killed by a hit-and-run driver many years ago," she said. "It happened on the road into town, and she was wearing a hoodie, just like this one." $50-cent piece. There is a story told in Troy and Albany about a couple returning home from a trip to New England. They were driving home in a carriage and were somewhere near Spiegeltown when the light failed and they knew they had to seek shelter for the night. The husband spotted light through the trees and turned their horse into a small lane leading up a hill. A pleasant little house stood at the crest, and an old man and his wife met the couple at the door. They were in night clothes and were obviously about to turn in, but they welcomed the travelers and offered them a room. The old woman bustled about making tea and offered freshly baked cakes. Then, the travelers were shown to their room. The husband wanted to pay the old couple for their lodgings, but the old woman shook her head, and the old man refused any payment for such a small service to their fellow New Yorkers. The travelers awoke early and tiptoed out of the house, leaving a shiny 50-cent coin in the center of the kitchen table, where the old couple could not miss it. The husband hitched up the horse, and they went a few miles before they broke their fast at a little restaurant in Spiegeltown. The husband mentioned the nice old couple to the owner of the restaurant, and the man turned pale. "Where did you say this house was?" he asked. The husband described the location in detail.
You must be mistaken,
Said the restaurant owner.
That house was destroyed 3 years ago by a fire and killed the Brown family.
I don't believe it, the husband said flatly. Mr. and Mrs. Brown were alive and well last night. After debating for a few more minutes, the couple and the restaurant owner drove the carriage back out of town towards the old Brown place. They turned into the lane, which was overgrown with weeds, and climbed the hill to the crest. There, they found a burned-out shell of a house that had obviously not sheltered anyone for a long time. I must have missed the track, said the husband, and then his wife gave a terrified scream and fainted into his arms. As he caught her, the husband looked into the ruin and saw a burnt table with a shiny 50-cent piece laying in the center. The clown statue. A girl in her teens babysat for a wealthy family one night. The wealthy family had a very large house with many rooms, and it was filled with lots of artifacts and old ornaments from all over the world. As the parents were leaving to go out, the father told the girl that once she had put the kids down, she must go down to the basement and watch TV there, and not go wandering around the house. Once the kids were asleep, the girl retires to the basement room to watch TV. However, she cannot concentrate on her show because in the corner of the room is a life-size clown statue grinning at her. She finally decides to drape a blanket over the statue so she can ignore it. After a while, she can't stand looking at the clown statue's oversized feet sticking out from under the blanket. She decides to call the father and ask his permission to watch TV in another room because she is freaked out by the giant clown statue in the basement.
Listen very carefully,
Says the man to the girl.
Our children have been complaining about a clown that comes into their room in the middle of the night. We thought they were just having nightmares. We don't own a clown statue. You need to get the kids. Get out of the house. Now! I'll call the police. Go!
The girl hangs up the phone, turns around to look at the covered clown statue. But all there is a blanket on the floor. And she can hear steps coming down the basement stairs. The 13th floor. The first hotel to have more than 13 rooms had a huge Halloween party to celebrate its opening. Each floor was set up like a maze, decorated with cobwebs and other decorations. There were lots of people dressed up as ghosts and ghouls to frighten the partygoers. An exciting prize was hidden on the top floor, and the first person to reach the prize would win it. Jack and Sophia were two of the partygoers. They worked their way through the maze on the first few floors as they headed up through the building, and the hallways on each floor got darker and scarier. When they got to the 12th floor, Jack and Sophia heard a blood-curdling scream. As they made their way through the maze, they heard more screams and cries for help. Finally, in the lobby by the elevators, they saw blood dripping from the ceiling. The elevator dinged, and the doors slowly opened, which was strange because every other time they used the elevator, the doors had been quick and smooth. The light in the elevator was flickering as they stepped in, and as the doors began to close, the lights went out completely. Screams so loud the entire building heard them began to ring out. At first, the partygoers thought it was part of a scary Halloween theme, but then the owners of the building turned on all the lights and asked everyone to return to the lobby. And when people tried to use the elevator, it never came. The bell would ding, but the doors wouldn't open, and they were all forced to use the stairs. Down in the lobby, the building owners explained that they had not played the sounds of screams, and as they did a check of everyone who had come back, they realized Jack and Sophia had not returned. Just then, the doors to the elevator opened, and it was empty, except for Jack's watch, one of Sophia's shoes, and a pool of blood. Jack and Sophia were never seen again, and the building owners took away the button for the 13th floor so that nobody would disappear again. The long dead boy. Once upon a time, there was a 10-year-old girl who lived in London in a very old house. She hated the house. It was cold and damp. Plus, none of her friends would visit because it was believed by everyone in the neighborhood that a ghost lived in the house. The little girl was curious about the ghost, but nobody would talk to her when she asked questions about it or the history of the house. The house was scary, and some nights were worse than others. One night, when she was in her room reading, the lamp suddenly went off. She thought the light bulb had died. She did not want to bother her mother, who was already asleep, by asking for a new bulb. So, she put her book down and prepared to sleep. All of a sudden, there was a quiet knocking on the window next to her bed, and she saw the reflection of a boy about her age reflected on the window glass. The girl turned to look in her room, but saw nothing. She got out of bed and went over to her lamp. She felt something on the ground. She flicked the lamp, which now worked, and saw a red stain where she was standing. Then, it disappeared. It wasn't blood, because the red was too bright, almost pink, like paint. She scratched at the purple wall of her room, and believe it or not, behind the purple paint was pink, the same dark shade that had been on the floor. The girl ran out of her room towards her parents' room, but then she saw something that made her open her mouth to scream, though no sound came out. The attic door was right above her staircase, really high up. Only her dad could reach it. Hanging from it was a noose, the thing they hung people with. The girl ran back to her room, and there was a body in her bed. She grabbed her phone to take a picture. She wanted proof. She wanted to know in the morning if what she saw was real or a dream. She took a picture of her bed and, without looking at it, ran to get her mother. Grumpily, her mother came up the stairs. The girl pointed to where the noose had been, but now it was just a piece of string from her mother's sewing kit. She led her mother up to her room to show her the child's body, but now there was nothing. As her mother turned to leave the room, the girl remembered the camera. She grabbed it and turned it on, showing it to her mother. There was no longer a photo of her bed. Instead, there was a photo of a teenage boy with a red mark around his neck and pink paint all over his torn clothes. Her mother told her to stop joking around. However, her mother had an extremely worried look on her face. When asked what was wrong, she said, "He's back." The little girl never saw the little boy again, and her mother refused to tell her who he was. hide and seek. Two young brothers were at home alone in the apartment while their parents visited their neighbors next door for a while. "Be good, boys," their parents said. To keep themselves occupied, the boys decided to play a game of hide and seek. The older boy turned his head to the wall and began to count. 1, 2, 3, 4. He could hear his little brother's feet as he scampered about looking for a place to hide. "Ready or not, here I come," cried the older brother, and off he went, looking for his younger brother. He looked in all the usual places: behind the sofa, in the bathroom behind the shower curtain, behind the curtains in every room, and under all the beds. But he couldn't find him. The apartment was eerily silent. Then he heard a scraping sound coming from the wardrobe. The boy was sure he'd already looked there, but he went anyway and called out, "Come out, I found you!" But there was only silence. Again, he called for his brother to come out, and again, nothing. Opening the door, the boy tried to peer behind the wall of dresses and coats hanging there. He bent down, but he did not see any feet standing there. He began to rise up and put his hands out into the mass of clothes to feel for his brother when a small, white, icy cold hand came out and grabbed his wrist and tried to pull him in to the closet. He began to rise up and put his hand out into the mass of clothing to feel for his little brother, when a small, white, icy cold hand came out, grabbed him by the wrist, and tried to pull him into the closet. As he is trying to pull himself free, he hears a noise behind him, looks over his shoulder, and sees his brother behind him. "Couldn't you find me?" asked the boy. The older brother screams in fright and desperately tries to free himself from the grip of the hand, all the while being pulled into the wardrobe. The younger brother grabs him, and together, they manage to pull him free. They both run screaming from the apartment. Nobody knows what would have happened if the hand had managed to pull him in. Or maybe
you do.
Clap once for yes. A family was camping and left their tent to go on a day hike. They were a few hours from their campsite when a storm suddenly blew in. They became disoriented in the wind and driving rain. They tried to trace their steps back to the campsite, but became lost in the unfamiliar backcountry. Being experienced hikers, they knew once they were lost, it was best to stay put in one place, then wander in the woods. So they prepared to settle down and wait for rescue. Darkness fell, and the family built a fire to keep warm. As they snuggled up against each other and started to drift off to sleep, they heard a noise coming from the tree. "Who's there?" one of the parents called. But there was no answer. Then they heard the sound again. But once more, when they called out, there was no answer. "Perhaps it's someone who can't speak," suggested the daughter. Her mom called out, "Is there anyone there? Clap once for yes and twice for no." "You were right," said the parents to their daughter. "There is someone out there. Are you here to rescue us?" shouted the mom. "Are you lost like us?" "Do you live out here in the woods?" Let me try, said the son. Are you a boy? Are you a girl? They all looked at each other, puzzled. Thinking he was being funny, the son asked, Are you human? Now, the family was scared. Are you alone? Called the mother. The family huddled together more. How many of you are there then? The bloody hook. The reports had been on the radio all day, though she didn't pay them any mind. Some crazy man had escaped the state asylum. They were calling him the Hook Man since he had lost his right arm and it had been replaced by a hook. He was a killer, and everyone in the region was warned to keep watch and report anything suspicious. But this didn't interest her. She was more worried about what to wear on her date. After several consultation calls with friends, she chose a blue outfit in the very latest style and was ready and waiting on the porch when her boyfriend came to pick her up in his car. They went to a drive-in movie with another couple, then dropped them off and went to park in the local Lover's Lane. The outfit was a hit, and she cuddled close to her boyfriend as they kissed to the sounds of romantic music on the radio. Then, the announcer came on and repeated the warning she had heard that afternoon. An insane killer with a hook in place of his right hand was on the loose in the area. Suddenly, the dark, moonless night didn't seem so romantic to her. The Lover's Lane was secluded and off the beaten track, a perfect spot for a deranged madman to lurk, she thought, pushing her boyfriend away. Maybe we should just get out of here, she said. The Hook Man sounds dangerous. Oh, come on, babe, it's nothing, her boyfriend said, trying to get in another kiss, but she pushed him away. No, really, we're all alone out here and I'm scared, she said. They argued for a moment. He turned the key and went roaring out of Lover's Lane with a screeching of his tires. They drove home in stony silence, and when they pulled into her driveway, she opened the door and stepped into her driveway. Walling around, she slammed the door as hard as she could, and then screamed. Her boyfriend leapt out of the car and caught her in his arms. What's wrong? What's wrong? He shouted. And then he saw it. A bloody hook hung from the handle of the passenger side door. Well, I hope you all enjoyed those 10 classic ghost and urban legend stories that I collected for you and presented here today that were appropriate for the whole family. At least I think they all were and hope they were. Hopefully, judging by maybe the first couple of sentences, if there was one you thought maybe wasn't super appropriate for those who may be listening, you were able to shut it off. I do apologize. Like I said, I took a lot of these at the suggestion of parenting websites and stuff like that, so blame them, I guess. You do want to have a little bit of a scare on Halloween, but I don't think any of the stories were super that bad. But I hope that you guys enjoyed them, and let me know, because this was something very different for me, and I tried to present it in a spooky but still endearing way. So I hope I was able to accomplish that, and I hope you enjoyed it. I have one more big surprise for Halloween. and we're still working on it as I am recording this. And I cannot wait to release it to you guys. This is, without a doubt, one of the biggest projects I have ever been a part of. And I'm beyond words. I cannot wait to share it with you guys. Let's just say this is going to be a step up from anything I have ever done, especially for Halloween. Halloween means a lot to me, and it is a time of year that I just have such fond memories with. And on a personal note as well, I have a lot of fond memories from Halloween with some of these stories. I've always been a kid who, well, when I was a kid, of course, who was afraid of a lot. And these stories used to just terrify me. So it's fun to kind of now look back and maybe not be so scared of some of this stuff and kind of be able to have some fun narrating it. And I hope you guys had fun as well. Before we go, I of course want to take a second to give a huge shout out to my Patreon family, my hotheads. We have Scott Duquette, Jason Wilson of the Grey Rooms podcast, Tanner Wood of Baseline Feed, Ronan Kumori, Eric Phones, Arthur Unk, Mike Quintero from Mike's Mystery Mansion, and the newbie on the run here. We have, of course, Miss C.M. Peters from Baseline Feed. A humongous shout out to all of my patrons who, by the way, are all getting more exclusive content from the Tapes of Trepidation Horror Narration podcast, which they have access to. They're going to actually get, don't tell them I said this, but they're actually going to get 3 extra episodes this month on top of the episode I dropped earlier this month, because I am insane and I love narrating spooky stuff. So don't tell them I said that. Shh. Just keep it between us, okay? I can trust you. We just went through this together at the campfire. I can trust you. It's fine. It's fine. And if you would like to help support this podcast, get a little shout out like that at the end of every episode of The Harder Show, and also get access to more spooky content that I do all year round with the Tapes of Trepidation Horror Narration podcast, which, by the way, you can check out the preview of, which I dropped 2 weeks ago. Consider joining the Harder Show Patreon. We have a $1, $5, and $10 tier, which is monthly. Anything helps. My hope is to get to $100 a month. We are getting there. We're very close. And if I could hit that $100 a month, all costs associated with this show and future costs associated with this show, with some things I want to do, will be covered. And then we can do even cooler stuff. That's my hope. I want to really build a community, and that's what I'm trying to do. So I hope maybe if you enjoyed this, you'll take a second to consider. Even the $1 a month really, really helps. $5 is awesome. $10 is just insane. And I appreciate all of you so very much. Even if you are not in a position to be a patron and you're just still listening, you are seriously the best. Thank you so very much. Be sure to share this if you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun doing this, and I hope you did as well. And I am going to go ahead and finish off this marshmallow here. I got to get this thing in the fire. I've been holding it for a while. You got stuffed s'mores over there? Graham crackers? Little chocolate action? All right, okay, yeah. We'll talk after. And we, dear listener, will talk again pretty darn soon. Have a fantastic rest of your day. Take it easy.